In this video, I'm going to share with you videos, films, and shows that I have watched that have helped me improve my creative process. I'm not talking about creative styling. I'm talking about the project start to finish and everything in between and improving those processes. So the first video we're going to look at is a video by The Futur. It's actually a series called Building a Brand. A marketing agency called Blind went in and improved the brand of a brewing company, and they showed us a behind the scenes look. One of the things that I took away from this show was the stylescapes. I had never heard of a stylescape before. I had heard of a mood board, which is essentially taking a bunch of pictures and plopping them on a screen and taking inspiration from different parts of those images. A stylescape is actually taking that mood board and taking it 2 or 3 steps further. You're actually masking things out, you're changing the color, you're adding texture, iconography of things, and the way you actually want the project to look as a finished product. The second thing I learned from this series is that discounting rarely works as expected. The Blind marketing agency did give the brewing company a discount for this project, and because of that discount, sometimes the client can not take the project as seriously. They may not respect you and your time as much. And you might think, well, what does that have to do with the creative process? It slows down the creative process and it hinders progress in that process. The next video is an ESPN case study. It's actually a branding case study for their Monday Night Football show. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Monday Night Football shows on every single Monday night during the football season, and they have a bunch of graphics. One thing about the creative process for this project that I really liked was they picked like 5 or 6 words at the beginning of the project, and that kind of laid the foundation for the rest of the project. It's as simple as taking out a notebook and just writing 5 different words. I know people don't use notebooks anymore. You could do 2 or 3 words. But what they did was they used these words so that in the future, when they went on to future steps as a part of the creative process, they could always look back on those 5 or 6 words and say, does this, whatever I'm working on, does this art, design, whatever, does it fit in with those 5 words or one of those 5 words? And it helps keeps things aligned and centered to make sure that it stays within the brand that they're looking for. I also really enjoyed watching them create things from scratch. And then also there were things that were already created and kind of converting them over to the brand. So you have things that you're creating from scratch that you need to align with the brand. You also have things that have already been created that you need to bring into the brand, and they take different processes. So a lot of the football teams have different logos, right? So you need to take those logos and fit them in with this branding, whether it's colors, textures, whatever. And then you also have graphics of, say, like football players that are completely new from scratch, and you also need those to fit in here with the brand. So I really enjoyed watching that process and seeing those convert. Next on the list is the Flux Academy case studies. Now, I have not seen any of his newer ones, but I'm talking about the ones 3, 4, 5 years ago, where he would bring in other designers and he would talk about some of the projects that those designers had done and also some of the projects that Ron had done. So what I really liked about those projects was hearing how people communicated with clients. Obviously, the web designs that I create are very important, but in reality, the clients aren't hiring me just because of that. If I can't communicate those designs to my clients, they're not going to like it, whether it's good or not. So from the very beginning, when you're selling whatever you're selling, to the very end when you send the final invoice and they approve the final designs, you need to be able to communicate that effectively. And after watching these videos, I actually started to really put a lot of time into trying to figure out how to communicate my ideas to my clients, and I've seen really big payoffs from that. Another part of the creative process that I learned from this, unfortunately, is that all websites need redesigning at some point. I watched some of his older videos and then I looked at some of the websites to see if they were still up and running, and some of them were not, and some of them were redesigned. And it's a little bit depressing. You put all this time and work into these websites and only to get redesigned 3-4 years later. And I personally am not far enough into my business where I have a lot of my websites being redesigned, but I know the time is coming where that's gonna happen pretty soon. In fact, I have clients coming back to me for redesigns already, which I know it's going to happen where someone else is going to take one of the websites I built and redesign it, and that's just part of the process. The final videos that I want to talk about are Hollywood movie behind the scenes. I love movies. I love going to the movie. I love watching movies. One way that I have really understood the way that these big projects work, even if you're not making movies, if you're making websites, you understand how teams work together and how the process goes from the very first conception to a finished product. Lord of the Rings behind the scenes were actually probably the first behind the scenes I'd ever seen of a Hollywood movie, and my jaw was on the floor by the end of it. I could not believe how many secrets they were giving away in these behind the scenes videos, and so few people had seen them. One thing I took away from the Lord of the Rings behind the scenes videos is that Peter Jackson, the director, was always tinkering with his projects. He would go film all day, and then at the end of the day while he's eating supper, he would go and watch that film back. He would always be tinkering with it. And what he understood is that until you hit publish or render or export, whatever you're doing, it's not done. You can always make changes to it. And I understand sometimes that doesn't work well. Communicating with clients, you have to sometimes say, okay, we're done with this, we have to move on to the next. But if you have the ability to, you can always go back and tinker with things and change, because it's never done until you hit publish. Iron Man is one of my favorite movies of all time. Jon Favreau was the one who directed it, and I really like how they incorporated live action with CG. And you might think, okay, if I'm making a website, what on earth does that have to do with websites? There is incorporating of different things and different styles. And again, I'm not going to go too far into this style work, but there are processes that you can take to incorporate 2D iconography, 3D graphics, 2D illustration, live action photos, right? I think a lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to go with a 3D website, right? But you can actually incorporate 3D with professional photos that were taken by a professional photographer. And the process you use to put those two together sometimes isn't always what you think. And I think this Iron Man behind the scenes video really helped me understand that process. Now, I know not everyone loved the Star Wars prequels. In fact, they weren't my favorite movies, but the behind the scenes are absolute gold mines for improving your creative process. I remember watching George Lucas come in with his storyboards, and there was a bunch of, I think, VFX supervisors behind him, and they're trying to figure out how they could accomplish George Lucas's story ideas. And I loved the banter that they had. They're just like, what if we did this? What if we did that? And they weren't using technical terminology. They weren't like speaking another language. They were just bantering. I really like that as part of the creative process, because you're basically just saying what if, and then you're figuring out ways to accomplish that. George Lucas has also created an environment of being creative. Obviously, George Lucas is very creative himself, but he's got a team around him that's also very creative, and I enjoyed watching that environment of just letting people be creative. He would sometimes bring people in for one-on-one meetings, and he wouldn't tell them, hey, you need to do this technical thing. He would say, here's kind of what I want, and you're the artist, and I'm gonna let you figure out how you can get to that end point. I really enjoyed seeing that, and I think it helped me improve a lot. So I hope you liked this type of video. If you did, let me know. If you didn't, also, I guess, let me know. We'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.